We have seen quite a few embarrassing playoff performances by the Toronto Maple Leafs over the course of the last 6 to 7 years, but I think it's safe to say games 5 and 7 of the second round against the Florida Panthers on home ice were two of the absolute worst, as the Maple Leafs were outscored by a total of 12-2 in those two games. And although it feels like we say the same thing every year, this absolutely has to be the offseason we see big changes in the Maple Leafs organization, and I'm not talking about them going out and getting a new head coach or a new general manager or a new goaltender or reshaping the blue line. They have done all of those things, but the one thing that has remained consistent throughout all of these playoff failures is the core four and their inability to show up in big games when it matters most. And given the fact that both Mitch Marner and John Tavares are set to become unrestricted free agents on July 1st, again, even though it feels like we say the same thing every year, I think this will finally be the offseason that the core four is broken up. If I had to make a prediction, I'm going to say Mitch Marner ends up leaving in free agency, but John Tavares returns on a team-friendly deal. But those obviously aren't the only moves that I'm expecting the Maple Leafs to make this offseason. I think there's a pretty good chance we see them make a handful of trades. So I figured, what better way to kick off a new season of NHL Deal or No Deal than with a Toronto Maple Leafs-centric episode. As always, when it comes to these videos, a huge shout out and thank you to each and every one of you who participated and sent in a mock trade. Even if your comment isn't featured in this video, just know I read them all and I appreciate all of you guys. So with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off the episode with a smaller mock trade from Drew Ruff 410, who says to Boston, Nick Robertson, to Toronto, Jacob Lauko. Boston gets the more skilled reclamation project that can ideally add at least a little of some much needed talents. In return, Toronto gets a bottom six bundle of energy that can give their depth some much needed jam. Now, I like this idea quite a bit. I do feel like there's going to be quite a few people who feel like Nick Robertson is worth a lot more than this. But to be honest, I can't imagine he's a guy who has a whole lot of trade value right now. Nick Robertson is not 19 or 20 years old anymore. He's 23, and he's still yet to become an everyday player for the Maple Leafs. He was a healthy scratch at times throughout the regular season and for the majority of the playoffs. We know the goal-scoring ability and the offensive talent is there, but we're at the point where it's starting to feel like Robertson is just never going to reach his full potential in Toronto. I think it's time to move on and give Nick Robertson a fresh start, a change of scenery, and in my opinion, a team like Boston would be a really good fit for him. They're obviously headed in a younger direction, and this past season, depth scoring was a big issue for them, so somebody like Nick Robertson would add some much-needed goal-scoring ability to their middle six. And when it comes to this deal from the point of view of the Maple Leafs, obviously, Lauko doesn't have the kind of offensive upside that Nick Robertson has. He's more of a defensive energy guy, but he is only a few years older than Nick Robertson, and like Robertson is a restricted free agent this offseason. But to me, this trade is just more about the Maple Leafs doing Nick Robertson a solid. Again, I feel like moving on from Toronto is what would be best for his career at this point. And a move like this would definitely be better than, say, not qualifying him and letting him get to unrestricted free agency. And who knows, maybe Lauko could end up being a useful fourth liner for Toronto. At the end of the day, he's young, cheap depth. I think this is a solid mock trade, so I'm going to say deal to this one. Moving on now to the next mock trade. This is a big one from Captain Poppy, who says to Toronto, Rakell, 25% retained, Noel Acciari, 50% retained, and Jason Dickinson, 50% retained. To Pittsburgh, Braden Kessler, Calle Yarncroke, Alex Steeves, Pontus Holmberg, a 2026 third, 2026 fifth, 2027 second, and 2028 second. And to Chicago, Matt Benning, David Kampf, Nick Robertson, a 2027 third, and a 2028 fifth. With Marner leaving, the Leafs get better depth and still have lots of money for other moves, including re-signing players like Nyes. I know Dubas was looking for 2 firsts for Rakell, but that's not a fair asking price. But in this mock trade, the Penguins get a good return for Rakell coming off of a great year, including a prospect and one of the AHL's top scorers with some picks. Chicago adds a bit in areas of need like defense, faceoffs, scoring, and PK. I feel like you're on the right track with this one. Your thought process definitely makes a lot of sense. Assuming Mitch Marner leaves in free agency, the Maple Leafs are going to need a top 6 winger. In this mock trade, you're getting that in Rakell, who, like you said, is coming off of a great season, 35 goals, 70 points. He signed to a really solid contract. They're also getting 2 really solid depth pieces in Nola Chari and Jason Dickinson, so I think this trade makes a lot of sense for the Leafs. I think it makes sense for the Blackhawks as well, but where I'm going to have to say no deal to this mock trade is from the Pittsburgh Penguins perspective. I don't think they would do this. I agree with you that Dubas' asking price of 2 first-round draft picks for Rakell is too high. I don't think he's going to end up getting something like that for him if he ends up trading him, but I do feel like this package is way too big of a step down from something like 2 first-round draft picks for Dubas to accept. Braden Kessler is an undrafted prospect who played the majority of this past season in the East Coast Hockey League. Calle Jarnkrok is an overpaid depth piece at this point in his career. And when it comes to Alex Steeves, sure, he's been a dynamic scorer in the American Hockey League, but he's 25 years old and he's only played 14 total NHL games. I feel like the odds of him becoming a full-time NHLer at this point are pretty low. Pontus Holmberg is a solid defensive bottom 6 player, but there isn't a whole lot of offensive upside there. And when it comes to the draft picks, sure, you're getting 2 second-round draft picks, but I think there's still a pretty good chance the Leafs are a good team in 2027 and in 2028, so they'll likely be later second-round picks. Not a huge fan of this return at all for Pittsburgh, so that's why I'm going to go ahead and say no deal to this one, but like I said, I think your thought process makes sense and you're on the right track here. Moving on now to the next mock trade. This one comes from Drano90, who says, to Columbus, Austin Matthews; to Toronto, Adam Fantilli, Yegor Chinnikov, Matthew Olivier, and 2 2025 first-round picks, one being Columbus's and one being Minnesota's. Now let me just start by saying this. I know the Maple Leafs are not trading Austin Matthews. I just wanted to include this in here as a hypothetical. Let's say they were open to the idea of trading away Matthews. Would a package like this be enough? Is Columbus giving up too much? If you're a Leafs fan, let me know down below in the comments, would you accept this trade offer for Austin Matthews? To try and put together some kind of a guess as to what an Austin Matthews trade would look like, I immediately think to the Mikko Rantanen trade from Carolina to Dallas, Stankoven, multiple first-round picks, and I also think back to the Jack Eichel trade to Vegas, which was Alex Tuch, Peyton Krebs, and a first-round pick. So with those deals in mind as kind of a baseline, I honestly kind of feel like Columbus is giving up too much in this mock trade. Adam Fantilli is still only 20 years old. He's coming off of a big breakthrough season where he scored 30-plus goals and put up 50-plus points. I feel like we've seen enough from Adam Fantilli at this point to believe that at his peak, he could be a top 10 center in the NHL. You're also giving up a guy in Yegor Chinnikov who is still relatively young, just 24 years old, and I think he has the potential to be a 20-goal scorer. And then obviously Matthew Olivier, one of the premier tough guys in the NHL, and 2 first-round picks. That's a lot, so I honestly think I'm going to say no deal to this trade from the Blue Jackets side of things. Again, this is all just hypothetical because I don't think the Maple Leafs would ever even consider trading Austin Matthews, at least not right now. Moving on now to the next mock trade. This one comes from 5 Drunk Whales, who says Morgan Rielly to Vancouver for Garland and Sherwood. Vancouver gets a local guy with upside and who's got term, while also trading away guys on expiring deals. Leafs get 2 solid middle sixers. Morgan Rielly is a name that a lot of people are throwing around as somebody who the Maple Leafs should look to move on from this offseason. The thing is, Morgan Rielly has a full no-move clause, so if he doesn't want to get traded, then he's not getting traded. However, here you have him going to his hometown team. Maybe that would be enough to incentivize him to waive his no-move clause. But even if Rielly was willing to waive that no-move clause in this particular mock trade, I'm still going to have to say no deal here. And honestly, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for either side. Starting off with Vancouver, I feel like their left side is pretty solidified with Quinn Hughes and Marcus Pettersson. What, would Morgan Rielly come in and be their third pairing guy on the left side, or would they move one of those guys to the right side? I just don't really think the fit makes a whole lot of sense. And when it comes to the Maple Leafs, their blue line was great this season defensively. Offensively, not so much. They don't get a whole lot of offensive production from their blue line. Even with Morgan Rielly on the roster, I think the Leafs could still use a puck-moving defenseman, an offensive threat to put on that top power play unit. But especially if they're going to trade Morgan Rielly, who is already probably their best offensive defenseman, their best puck-moving defenseman, they need to be getting someone back who is an upgrade over Morgan Rielly in those areas, or at least have a plan to go out and make an additional trade to acquire someone like that. So for those reasons, I am going to say no deal to this one. The next mock trade we have comes from Mangoes, who says, to the Toronto Maple Leafs, Erik Karlsson, 50% retained. To the Pittsburgh Penguins, Morgan Rielly, David Kampf, and a 2028 second-round pick. Leafs get pure offensive defensemen they need for $2.5 million cheaper and dump David Kampf. Pens get younger and gain a draft pick. Now, this is an idea that I really like. I think Erik Karlsson would be a fantastic fit for this version of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like I just mentioned when talking about the previous mock trade, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for the Leafs to trade Rielly unless they have a plan to go out and get a defenseman who is a better puck mover and a better offensive defenseman than Rielly. And here they're doing that, bringing in Erik Karlsson, who is one of the best offensive defensemen of our generation. Obviously, he's a little bit past his prime, but he's still very effective. I think he could do wonders for the Maple Leafs power play, which at times just kind of looked choppy and out of sync with 5 forwards on it. So if you're the Maple Leafs, I think you're doing this in a heartbeat. The question is, would Morgan Rielly be willing to waive his no-move clause to go to Pittsburgh, and is this a good enough return for the Pittsburgh Penguins for Erik Karlsson? Especially when you consider the fact that because they're retaining on Erik Karlsson, they actually lose cap space by making this trade. They don't gain any. We know Kyle Dubas loves his guys, though. He's the one that signed Morgan Rielly to his current contract. He's the one who brought David Kampf to Toronto. And like you said, the Penguins do get a bit younger by making this trade. They get an additional draft pick, which does kind of align with their current direction. I honestly really like the idea of this mock trade, so I'm going to go ahead and say deal here. And now finally, finishing up this episode of NHL Deal or No Deal with the last mock trade from 37 Will Dog, who says, to Seattle, Toby Niemela, Nick Robertson, and a 2025 second to Toronto, Jared McCann. I'm very intrigued to see what ends up happening with Jared McCann. I think it's pretty clear Seattle is going in a bit more of a younger direction. They brought in Capo Caco as kind of a reclamation project, and he did well there. They moved on from Gord and Bjorkstrand at the deadline and brought in 2 first-round picks. If Jared McCann is a name that they make available for trade, I think the return for him could be pretty huge, something similar to the return they got for guys like Gord and Bjorkstrand, as Jared McCann is a very good all-around top 6 forward with a lethal shot, and he's on a very team-friendly contract as well. Someone like McCann would definitely be a massive addition for the Maple Leafs. It's pretty crazy that they actually had him at one point, but elected to protect guys like Alex Kerfoot and Justin Hall in the expansion draft instead. I think I am going to go ahead and say no deal to this mock trade, though. I just don't think this is enough for Jared McCann. I feel like it would be really difficult for the Leafs to pull off a trade for a player like McCann because of the fact that they don't have any of their next 3 first-round picks. Sure, there's some upside there with Robertson, but like I said earlier in the video, I just don't think he has a whole lot of trade value right now. There was a time it looked like Topi Niemela was one of the better defensive prospects in the world. Now, not so much. He's already 23 years old, still has yet to play a single NHL game. It kind of feels like his progression has plateaued a little bit. If the Kraken were getting the 19-year-old versions of Topi Niemela and Nick Robertson in this trade, then they probably take this. But neither of those guys have really progressed and developed quite the way that the Leafs were expecting and hoping them to, so I'm saying no deal here. So that is going to wrap up this episode of the NHL Deal or No Deal series. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, huge thank you to each and every one of you who sent in a mock trade. You all make these interactive videos so much fun for me to make. If you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.